Hi folks, and welcome to Breaking Woke, where we look at how to identify, debunk, and dismantle politically correct ideas. Today we're going to dive into a heavy topic, and it's the question, if you do not ban free speech, do you end up with the next Hitler? A little bit of background to this one. In 1953, there was a writer, a Nobel laureate from Poland by the name of Czesław Miłosz, and he wrote a book called The Captive Mind. The Captive Mind is a warning to the West about tyranny, and in this particular case about communist tyranny. Czesław Miłosz points out that prior to the fall of Poland to Moscow, Moscow would send out trained Marxist dialecticians to a series of what we might today call town hall meetings. And you would have this representative speaking on behalf of communism, up on a stage in a town hall meeting, entertaining all objections. And these people were so well trained that even the intellectuals of Polish society were unable to raise valid objections to communism. And he points out that in losing those debates, they lost the cultural will to stand up against a tyrant. Losing debates of this nature can mean that you surrender your culture to a tyrant. That is our background, that is our framework for thinking about this idea. Now, here's the question that we are given by modern progressives today. If we don't ban certain speech, if we don't limit certain speech, won't we end up with the most hateful voices prevailing? Or in other words, if you don't limit speech, won't you end up under Hitler all over again? And I love that word limit. I mean, it's such a wonderful euphemism. No, we're not going to ban speech, we're just going to limit it. It's akin to saying, well, I'm not going to murder you, I would never do that. I'm just going to terminally incapacitate you. Well, I guess that's not so bad then. So, the idea is, unless you limit aggressive voices, you end up with the next Hitler. Well, I count at least 4 very dangerous flaws with that argument. Let's look at each in turn. The first flaw. The first flaw is the assumption that radical Nazism, that Hitler's rise to power, was the product of free speech. The opposite is true. If you look at the history of Germany and the rise of the Nazi Party and of Hitler, what you had in that particular situation was a strong-spoken, charismatic character who banned all other viewpoints. So not only was that not the product of free speech, it was the product of a political group violently shutting down free speech. And of course, what was the worst offender in that particular case was the idea of the Jewish people as dehumanized, as less than human. And that was the prevailing political idea at the time. And anyone who wanted to speak out against it was silenced via violence, state-enacted violence. So it starts like this. Political correctness, and in fact, the enforcement of political ideas, always starts off with what you should say. Then it progresses to what you may not say. Then it goes to what you are compelled to say. And then it takes the next step, which is, and tell us if your neighbors are not saying it. And that is how dangerous ideas are policed in a community. It is the opposite of free speech. Could it be possible to dehumanize people through political correctness and the banning of free speech today? Well, try this one out. In the last 6 days, Planned Parenthood has ended more human lives than the Spanish Inquisition managed to achieve in 350 years. And it's done with euphemisms and the dehumanizing of a demographic. It's not a baby, it's a fetus. It's a meaningless collection of cells. And that's a pre-scientific idea. It's an idea that we could perhaps have been excused for prior to our ability to look into the womb and to measure the brain waves of a child. Of course, the counter-argument is, it's my body, it's my choice. Well, the argument to that one is, what is your second brain thinking right now? Because modern science tells us there are brain waves, there are emotions, there are patterns of thought. So unless you're able to answer the question, what is your second brain thinking right now? The reality is, that is not your brain. And to use euphemisms to dehumanize the world's most vulnerable demographic, a child in the womb, is precisely what happens when free speech is deplatformed, banned, or limited. PC language does not protect vulnerable demographics. It does the opposite. It enables their destruction. Fallacy number 2. The assumption that under free speech, bad ideas prevail. The exact opposite is true. Under the scientific method, the basic idea is this: bring all ideas into the public forum and we slowly vet them. We test them for their viability, their accuracy, and we attempt to debunk them, and that which prevails is held to be the contingent truth. Now, the conservative view of how society evolves follows the exact same approach as the scientific method, and it basically says we don't want violent revolution, and we don't want ideas imposed from the top down. Instead, what we want is a slow vetting of ideas to see what works. Now, by contrast to that one, I did a video a few back in which, at the same time as Islamic groups are beheading people in Vienna and in France, the Scottish Parliament is proposing a hate crimes bill that will flat out prevent you from saying anything negative about Islam. That is the opposite of the scientific method. That is the opposite of the conservative approach to a slowly evolving society in which we are allowed to talk about ideas and to vet the good from the bad. Under Nazism, you could not vet bad ideas. Nazism is one of the most evil ideologies we have ever seen, and you were not permitted to speak out against it. Speech was restricted, it was limited, and it was met with deplatforming and violence. We cannot afford to have that happen again. Fallacy number 3, the assumption that banning crazy voices is somehow better. Folks, make no mistake, we have people today who would very happily live in a repeat of the Nazi scenario. There are crazies among us. There's no disputing that idea. So the temptation is to ban and deplatform and to push out those voices. Is it a good idea? No, because here's what happens. Those voices then go underground and do not get their ideas vetted. If you allow crazy, evil people to speak out loud, others are then able to speak against them and to put social pressure back in return via the open discussion of ideas. You hear a person proposing crazy things like this, and you can argue with them. If such people are deplatformed and sent underground, they become an isolated echo chamber talking to nobody but themselves. So in other words, what happens is they do not have any social input whatsoever to mellow out or to debate or to encounter and resist their ideas. Instead, they become increasingly radicalized. That's worse, not better. And number 4, and this is one that drives me crazy, the idea that people who believe in free speech are in some form similar to people who believe in Nazism. Free speech is a value practiced and believed in by classical liberals. And I draw a distinction there. It's not the same thing as a progressive liberal today, but classical liberals and today's conservatives. Those are the groups of people who do believe in free speech. Now, conservatives are the group of people who oppose Nazism. You had conservative Christian Winston Churchill at the head of the Allied forces facing down Nazism. There is often this incredibly fallacious argument made that Nazism is somehow a form of extreme conservatism. It is not. The first thing that Nazism ever did was violent revolution against the old order in Germany. That is progressive. That is utopian. It was a violent revolution against a society for a new order and a new way forward. It is the opposite. And of course, here we get an interesting argument, and it's a bit of a weak tea argument, presented by people on the far left, where they say, yes, but it was communist Russia who finally helped to defeat Hitler. Well, that's true, but it's only true if you ignore the fact that they started the war on his side. So when communist Russia was free to choose, it chose Hitler. And it did so in no small part because Nazism stands for National Socialist Workers' Party. And there was some degree of a natural alliance there. Here's the difference. In Russia, they looked at it as a non-countrywide, a non-nationwide idea. They wanted workers of the world to unite. In Germany, they saw it different. They said, we want socialism, but we want national socialism. It was a German identity socialism as compared to Russia's global socialism. But the word socialism is in the title, and they started off fighting on the same side. It was only when Hitler betrayed them and attacked them that they were forced to switch sides and fight against him. When left to their own devices, the radical left, the communist left, fought with Hitler. As World War II played out, conservative Christian Winston Churchill was at the helm, and the last man to face off against communist Russia was conservative Christian Ronald Reagan. Here's a politically incorrect thing to say. If you want freedom, if you want to face down tyrannies, you need conservative Christians at the helm. I stand by that one, it's historically true. You can even go back to Abraham Lincoln, the conservative Christian who fought against slavery. So, summary of the idea. Unless we ban free speech, could we end up with another Hitler? No, the opposite is true. If you ban free speech, you are following the same formula that saw Hitler rise to power. Free speech is how we vet ideas. When we are not allowed to speak freely, ideas do not get vetted, resentments grow, and evil ideologies can prevail. Free speech is the release valve by which logic enters the equation and dispels terrible ideas like Hitler's Nazism. If you've just stumbled across this video and enjoyed it, please subscribe to the channel, and if you find it helpful, please do share it. The idea is, on this channel, we identify, debunk, and dismantle dangerous politically correct ideas. My name is Douglas Kruger. I'm the author of the global new book, Political Correctness Does More Harm Than Good.